Alright, hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Aaron Yoon coming at you live from New York City. Today is going to be somewhat of a the start of a somewhat different direction for this YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing a lot of these shows here according to more consistent to fit with like a podcast instead of doing a lot of visual aids and your standard video. Just to expand my horizons and give this a shot. So I did change my mic. Maybe you saw the review video that I did with regarding this mic. The reason I got this was to start podcasting more and get a little bit of the noise cancellation effect and higher output of audio quality. So soon when I do my podcast launch, which will be sometime in January, you'll see that the launch campaign. But if you're part of this Facebook page, or you're part of the YouTube channel, you will get to see the live raw recording of it, which I won't save really because that'll be a disservice to the podcast listeners. But you get to see it live in real time if you catch me live. So what is going to happen today? So today I'm going to record one episode, and I'm going to be doing this somewhat on a regular basis, maybe daily, maybe every other day, and so you have the opportunity to catch me live when I do it. Okay, so let's get going. Are you sick and tired of watching other people on the internet get rich while you're still stuck slaving away at a job for a paycheck that doesn't even seem to be moving you forward in life? Well, in today's episode, you're going to learn about the 7 deadly sins of personal finance. And if you've ever felt this way, you are probably committing one or more of the 7 deadly sins. Today I'm going to talk about the first one, and that is simply this: measuring wealth in dollars. Or if you're not from America, if you're measuring wealth in euros or British pounds or Japanese yen, doesn't matter. Measuring wealth in the amount of money that you have in your bank account is one of the biggest cardinal sins of personal finance, yet it's something that we're trained to do, and almost everybody does it on some level. The reality is that money is something. I'm gonna use the word dollars just for the sake of this conversation. And dollars are something that is finite, that most people think is finite, but in actuality, it's infinite. So, at the time of this recording in 2020, we are still sitting in the middle of a global pandemic. And one of the side effects of and consequences of this global pandemic is that the Federal Reserve, the most powerful private organization on the planet, decided that America needed $6 trillion extra dollars in its economy to circulate. Not necessarily America, the world needed $6 trillion extra U.S. dollars to circulate in the economy to keep it alive. Think of this stimulus package, the $6 trillion stimulus package, as like a steroid injection that a surgeon might give to a dying patient who's literally flatlining on the table. And in order to keep him alive, you have to, even though steroid injections or other life-saving measures might be damaging long-term, in the short term, it's an emergency situation, so it totally makes sense to do it. That's what the stimulus package represents. And that should also give you an example of just how worthless, actually, for lack of a better term, that a dollar is. A dollar, it represents an agreement between two people, right? The buyer and the seller. But the amount of dollars can change, as we saw. It only takes a global pandemic to generate 6 trillion extra dollars conjured out of thin air. So if something can be conjured out of thin air, then its intrinsic value is actually not that high. And measuring your worth with the number of dollars you have is actually a mistake. It's fine if you want to, if you just want to determine how much you can buy, or if you just want to feel good because you look at your bank account, you see a certain number, several thousand, several hundreds of thousands, several million, whatever that number is for you, it gives you a sense of feeling of security and a feeling that you have enough money. But actual wealth shouldn't actually be measured in dollars or money. The one thing that all of us, whether it's you or me, the homeless guy on the streets of New York City, or the Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, the one thing that unites all of us and makes us all the same is time. Real wealth is measured in time. How much, or rather, how long can you do whatever you want without having to trade any time for money before you can't afford to do the things that you want to do anymore, right? That might seem a little bit convoluted, but I think most of you can follow along. How long can you go without working is really what it comes down to, okay? And how satisfied are you going to be with that kind of lifestyle? Because you can look at the homeless guy on the street. He can do whatever he wants. He has no boss. He has no one to answer to. But how much freedom does he actually have? How much can he can't afford a roof over his head. How satisfying is that life? On the contrary, how satisfying is the life of slaving away at a job for a boss that you hate, for a promotion that you may or may not ever get, depending on availability or depending on nepotism and who likes you. So let's think about it like this. Like, what is the purpose of money? The purpose of money is simply to buy stuff. One of the things that you're always going to get from me is I keep it stupidly simple. That's my KISS acronym. KISS stands for Keep It Stupidly Simple. That's what you're going to get from me. And the purpose of money, I don't care who you ask, the purpose of money is simply to buy stuff. So what is the value of money? Now, let me ask you this. Can you buy the same amount of stuff with $100 today as you could with $100 100 years ago? And I think we would all agree, because of things like inflation, that you absolutely can't buy nearly as much today with $100 as you did 100 years ago. So that should already tell you that the value of money isn't determined by the number of dollars you have. It's the relative purchasing power of that dollar. And that relative purchasing power only goes in one direction. It is always shrinking. I remember when my mom told me about the first house that she bought when she came to America from South Korea. She immigrated here with my dad back in the late 70s, early 80s or something. And the first house that they bought was around like $150,000. And recently, because we visited the neighborhood over in Bayside, that house was valued at $650 or $750,000. And she's like, "Oh man, you know what? If I just held on to that house, I could have made so much money." Well, one of and this is a common notion of people who want to believe that their house has increased in value like crazy, and that's not really the case, because a lot of the value of that house is you have to adjust that for inflation. Most people in real estate that I talk to, especially if they're just a homeowner, they're not adjusting for inflation when they do a calculation like that. My mom certainly didn't. And so this reminds me of kind of like a phenomenon that we have in that I used to experience when I played pickup basketball in high school and college. I have not really played recently. I don't know that my knees can survive pickup basketball on the courts here in New York City. But one of the things that I do remember is that we would play a game to 11 or 21 or whatever, right? And we have to basically agree upon the score. Even if you're with perfect strangers, like people you've never met before, you just play a pickup at a park or something. You have to agree on the score to know who won. And one of the things that we would do is we would play our hearts out, but mostly this is not the NBA or anything. Mostly people are playing for their own glory. They want to score. Everyone absolutely knows how many points they scored, but they don't know the score of the game. And when we ask, like, okay, wait, is the game almost over? Are we winning? Who's winning? Or is it close? We have to kind of rehash the score. Almost always it becomes a calculation of, well, I have 3 points. How many points do you have? You have 4 points? You liar! You don't have 4 points. You have like 2 or 3 at most. It becomes like a negotiation of how many points in each individual has, and we have to agree upon it, then add it all up. Almost nobody paid attention to the score of the game, which is the most important score. Everybody paid attention to how many points that they had. This is not that different from how we operate in personal finance. We don't really know what the score is relative. If our opponent, let's say, is the world around us, the purchasing power of the dollar shrinking, how much is it shrinking by? How much is my wealth shrinking if I have the same number of dollars in my savings account, for example? We don't pay attention to the relative score of the purchasing power of my dollar against the world around me. What we do pay attention to almost religiously is the number of dollars that we have in the savings account. That number we almost never, ever forget. We almost always inevitably ignore and forget what's the cost of goods around us. What's the CPI? Do you even know what a CPI is? Right? What's the inflation rate? Do you believe the inflation rate that the government puts out as a baseline of 2 to 3% per year? Do you believe that? Or do you do your own calculations? Almost nobody thinks like this, except for the ultra wealthy. They have teams of people operating exactly like this and doing exactly this type of calculation. So it's becoming really important. Obviously, it's very important to know how much money you have. But that's just like the training wheels for personal finance. When I learned to ride a bike, I started off with training wheels. And I remember I was only like 5 years old, which I think is still an okay age to be using training wheels. But I remember my grandpa, who passed away a few years ago, when I was younger, he took me to the park. He was visiting from Korea, and he took me to the park with my bike with my training wheels on, and he saw, and I was just riding around the little pond there, and I personally was having the time of my life, but when we came home, he scolded me for not being able to ride a bike without my training wheels. Because there was a girl at the park that was not that much older than me, and she was riding around doing the same thing I was in the reverse direction. She was riding around the pond with no training wheels. She was riding just like a legit bike, and I still had my training wheels on. And he said, what's wrong with you? Why can't you? Why are you using four wheels when that girl over there is using two. Now, he was a little. He was obviously, you can tell that he was a little bit of a tough guy, and he had that tiger mom type of attitude as my grandpa. So, but that story kind of reminds me of training wheels in the realm of personal finance. In personal finance, knowing how much money you have is just training wheels to play the bigger game. Now, you could stay with your just riding a bike with training wheels for the rest of your life, but that'd be very limiting. You would be very limited to do what you wanted to do with if you couldn't ride a bike without any training wheels. So knowing things like monetary policy and adjusting for inflation on a regular basis, recognizing market cycles and that market crashes are a natural part of the market cycle, and learning how to avoid market crashes. These are all techniques that require you to graduate above training wheels and just the training wheels of just simply measuring how much money do I have on a day-to-day basis. I just want to not lose any of this money. The game of money is a race. And it's about speed. It's not about the amount of fuel you have. And ultimately, that's what dollars represent. Dollars are fuel. Paying attention to only how much money you have on a day-to-day basis or on a yearly basis is kind of like driving a race car and monitoring your fuel gauge the entire time, or your fuel mileage. Like, oh, am I in this race to get the best gas mileage possible? A lot of people, if I were to just drop the average person in the seat of a race car, a lot of people would gravitate towards, what's my fuel economy right now? Because that's what we're programmed to think. A wealthy person behaves very similar to a race car driver. It's about beating the person or the racer, my opponent, whoever I'm racing against. Or it's about racing against a score to beat. Maybe it's like I'm trying to break a record or something like that. I'm trying to do X amount of laps in Y amount of time. That's the actual game of money that's being played. But that's measured in a completely different unit, often time, or a rate of return. Something that is a relative measurement, not a fixed finite measurement of dollars. You almost will never win a race if most of your attention is on your fuel gauge. Just like you'll almost never achieve financial freedom if all you can pay attention to is the number of dollars that you have. You have to understand the game that you're actually in if you want to play. If you don't want to play, this is assuming, of course, that you actually want to build wealth. If you don't want to do that, then why are you listening to this podcast? So this is for a specific purpose. I'm not saying that it's wrong to count your dollars, to stash it under your mattress, keep it in a safe, and just let it sit there and feel safe about it. There's nothing wrong with feeling safe. But if you're in this game to build wealth, those are training wheels that you need to graduate from. So for me, my parents taught me to, and I think a lot of parents teach their kids to live under their, or live below their means, I think is the saying as it goes. And this might be a noble sounding type of philosophy, But in the world of wealth building, this is uh, this is like kryptonite. This is I'm gonna go as far as to say it's just flat out wrong. I actually spent about 5 years working and shadowing, like working for and shadowing a couple of billionaires. I didn't really become their friend or anything like that. I was their employee, but I did have access to them at the most personal level because of the nature of my job. And the one thing that I realized that they do is they don't live below their means. They question expenses for sure, and they understand budgeting, absolutely, but they don't try to live below their means. They spend the vast majority of their time and energy expanding their current means. And they spend accordingly, right? As a way of rewarding themselves. I'm oversimplifying a little bit there, but that's essentially the simple version of how billionaires and multimillionaires behave. They spend the majority of their time and energy looking to expand their means. They don't. Maybe they got there, and it's part of their practice to be very frugal. I know a lot of very rich and wealthy, yet frugal people, and it's part of their practice. But that's absolutely not the only formula to, and that is absolutely not the secret sauce of how they got to where they are. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure that you can distinguish between measuring your wealth in dollars or the amount of money versus the relative purchasing power and what's going on around you, right? This is a race against your environment, the monetary climate, if you will, the economic climate. This is a race. Behave like a race car driver that pays attention to speed, not the amount of fuel you have in the gas tank. This was the first cardinal sin of the 7 deadly sins of personal finance. Hope you enjoyed. See you on the next episode.